All right, hey, good morning, everyone. Just want to kick off this panel, DevOps in a Containers World. My name is Ryan King. I run our worldwide ISV program, and I also run Red Hat Startup Program. And I brought this panel together today to talk about DevOps and containers and microservices from a number of different perspectives. So we have representatives here from XebiaLabs and Shippable and NewRelic as vendors, and we have a number of experts here from Red Hat as well. I've asked Krish Subramanian, our Director of Strategy for OpenShift, to moderate the panel. What I'll do is I'll kick it to him to introduce himself, and we'll go down the line, and everybody get a chance to talk about who they are, what their focus is on this area, and then Krish will start sending some questions out to the panel, and we'd like this to be interactive, so we'll be asking for questions from the audience as well. Krish?
Thanks, Ryan. As he said, my name is Krish, and I do strategy for OpenShift, which is Red Hat's platform as a service. In the past, I used to be an analyst, so I think I fit the role of a moderator here, and I'll make sure that I keep them right on track and not go outside the topic. Regarding topic, we haven't decided anything. It's going to be totally free-flowing. In my opinion, like as I see the world, previously as an analyst, now as a strategist for OpenShift, cloud makes organization agile, but that itself brings in only incremental improvement. So then DevOps came along and made cloud better. Then the containers came in and sort of like changed the way we develop applications. And now microservices are a big thing. So in my opinion, it has to be everything together to maximize the return on your investment. So that's the story we want to put it out. Let's see where it goes. So I will let the panelists introduce themselves in 140 characters or less.
All right, so I'm Langdon White. I'm actually a platform architect for Red Hat. So that means basically I kind of work on Fedora on what's going on next. I'm also pretty heavily involved in the container development kit, which is kind of a tool chain to try to help people work with containers on top of our platforms, kind of baselining off of any OS, as well as working a lot in, like I said, kind of in the upstream in Fedora around how can we better modularize Fedora and RHEL and start to think about more kind of service-oriented, although I'm not allowed to say that anymore, microservice kind of models for the OS itself.
Well, that looks more like a Facebook post than a Twitter post.
Yeah, sorry.
A little bit more.
Yeah.
So we were saying this feels a little bit like the usual suspects, so I'm suspect number 2, or TJ Randall from XebiaLabs. I run the sales engineering organization, and XebiaLabs provides continuous delivery at scale. So where we basically add most of our benefit, so to speak, is we provide tooling that allows customers to orchestrate all of the solutions that you're trying to deploy throughout your organization, whether they're cloud-based, mobile, information of things, all those fun things. So.
Cool. My name is Avi Cavale. I'm the founder of Shippable. What we are is basically we announced a product just 2 days ago, which is called Devops 2.0. And what that is you do everything in terms of automation, code to prod, without writing any DevOps code. And that's basically the platform that we have. And it's completely container-based.
All right, my name is Arun Gupta. I run the developer outreach for JBoss middleware at Red Hat and technical marketing as well. I drive the microservices strategy at Red Hat. Been involved with containers, enterprise Java for many, many years now.
And my name is Shahram Kazai, and I am a software engineer working at NewRelic. My background is mostly in the past 17, 18 years in the areas of testing and application performance monitoring, and hence landing at NewRelic after being with Mercury Interactive, HP Software, for a short while with AppDynamics and other solutions out in the market. And I've been working for 2.5 years now with NewRelic.
Okay, we are going to start with the basic assumption that cloud is a given. Okay. Cloud is a given. So let's start with DevOps first, because we have some of our partners who are in that space. So how many of you here are using DevOps in your organization as a cultural phenomenon? How many of you are using it? How many of you know what DevOps is? Okay, that's a considerable number. So let's start with DevOps 2.0. since many of them know what DevOps is, let's start with DevOps 2.0. Why bring in another term? Like we have DevOps, that itself is confusing for many people.
So,
Some people talk it purely from a cultural point of view, some people talk it purely from a tools point of view. What is DevOps 2.0 and why do we need it?
So, I mean, I think to really understand what 2.0 is, first is to understand why DevOps actually came to be. And the philosophy, I mean, I was with Microsoft for over 12 plus years on pretty much Kinect, Azure, all of these things which were the modern technology. And then what we were doing was we were spending over 50% of our engineering resources trying to do infrastructure automation, writing code for all of that stuff. And that just didn't make sense, right? So a lot of this movement came in where, hey, we'll build this platform called DevOps. It's a cultural thing where, I mean, there was a lot of back and forth, right? Every time we would build an application and the operation would say, we can't run this in our infrastructure. So you would go back to redesign. There was a lot of this back and forth happening. So DevOps was about, hey, let's try to bring this all together and then try to do it cohesively. But what ended up happening actually was we ended up building a set of new tools, which was all these platforms. And it's almost like a balloon with water, right? You kind of squeeze at one end and it just starts popping up at another end. So what happened was now instead of having engineers and operations, now I have this whole set of new engineers who are building DevOps platforms. Now that is code. And how do you actually test the code that actually was written to deploy the code that you are actually deploying? So you get into this inception problem. So we kind of said we got to somehow differentiate this out completely. So what DevOps 2.0, according to us, is very, very simple. If you are building automation platforms and you are writing even one single line of code, you're not doing DevOps 2.0. It's as simple as that. And so what we kind of wanted to do was we have a platform that allows you to say, whether you use Git, whether you use whatever source control that you're using, you push your application, and magically it needs to come up in an environment completely in the right topology the way you want it. And you shouldn't be writing any infrastructure automation code on top of it. So to kind of sum it up, DevOps is basically dev over ops, where there is complete decoupling between dev and operations. So operations manage machines, development manage applications, and whatever is running on top of it.
Okay.
That's kind of how we think
Very
of it.
good, I fully agree with that.
Yep.
Because that's what I'm pushing for from the OpenShift point of view. PaaS does that. Why do you need anything other than PaaS for that?
So even if you do it with PaaS, so there are three parts of development, right? There is part one, which is the act of coding, which is you're building the feature. Then there is the right end of the spectrum is how do you actually run it, which is operations, which is where PaaS helps you to say, hey, I want to run this, and PaaS helps you to run it very, very quickly. What we are focused in is the decision to deploy. So that whole decision process of, I built this, how do I know I want to upgrade my entire workflow automatically? That versioning, that management of all that layers, how do I say, this whole setup, I mean, this is very easy if it's a 3-tier application. Now you go to microservices, and in Shippable, we have about 45 different microservices that are all running together. It's being developed in parallel in an agile fashion, so everything is changing all the time. So how do you know what is the state of this manifest, which you call as a version of your application? So that entire workflow is what Shippable is managing. PaaSes don't help in that. PaaSes will say, run this, let's say I'm using Docker, I just say Docker run this particular tag, bring it up, it'll bring it up. And your PaaS is gonna run, it's gonna operate and everything. But how do you know that that version should have been actually brought up? And that's what Shippable is focused on. And that's what we call DevOps 2.0.
And one of the challenges in an organization is the fact that you're doing that, running those versions, not just in one environment, right? So it's, you have a delivery pipeline from dev to production, and there's multiple environments along that path.
Yep.
So is that one of the things
Yes,
that you try
exactly.
to do?
So we also, I mean, you can kind of spin up environments even at a level of every single developer. It's to say, one of the big challenges is this, right? I mean, I used to always say this is, the problem you have in software development is all these people are developing applications together, and then I used to call this Friday afternoon flush, which is like exactly at 3 o'clock on Friday, all developers push the code together into this resource, and then they all go home. And then the whole of the weekend, all the test teams are trying to figure out, and Monday morning, you get this big report of all the things that broke, and guess what? Not a single developer thinks he or she actually broke it, right? Every single developer says, I didn't do anything there, so there's no accountability.
So then it's a cultural thing. Why are we focusing on tools?
No, not cultural, right? Now, the only way to solve this problem is you got to bring up that entire topology as close to the developer as possible. That means when the moment the developer pushes that code, that entire topology needs to come up fully test as though that's the only change that's in the system, and if that passes, that's when you push it to the next layer of your environment. So what you're doing is, instead of trying to bunch up everybody into one single bucket and then try to piece out together, you're keeping accountability as close to the developer as possible. That means developers have to manage these infrastructure all the time, and I need to write all these development platforms to do it. We take care of all of that with just one click of button. So that's where the tools come in.
So most of the DevOps discussion centers around CI/CD and other application lifecycle management tools. I think the key to a successful DevOps strategy is monitoring. Do you agree with that? And if yes,
Definitely.
how is it impacting DevOps?
Well, especially after microservices has picked up in the past 2-3 years, and there are little pieces of your application running all around the place, there is larger need for monitoring all of these components to see if they are healthy. Always check the performance, stay on top of it. And NewRelic, up until about a year and a half ago, was a single solution company. And they identified the need for other tools and solutions in the cloud to monitor your application. So they have come up with little modules, so it gives you the ability to monitor every piece and part of your application, whether you're running it on the cloud, on-premise, anywhere, it doesn't matter because of the nature of the tool. It really doesn't matter. As long as the agent that is running with your application has a way to report the data to our data center, you're good to go. And we are monitoring various languages, so it is not language specific. You have 6 languages to 6 agents for 6 different languages to monitor, and we also have a platform that offers a number of plugins that support any component that are not really a language application. Let's say a load balancer. Let's say it's the database. It's the memcache. And nowadays, you have a lot of these components interconnecting with each other and talking to each other, and it is a good idea to monitor all of them, and you see all this data coming into your account in NewRelic, and you get to see all of them in one pane of glass.
Well,
yes.
I think one thing that's a really good thing to highlight, though, is that's what continuous delivery and DevOps and those concepts demand, is that you're always going to have tools across your teams, your dev and your operations team. What you're really looking for is, if you're looking for tooling, is you want solutions that start to bring those disparate systems together so you can make decisions. So you just named off 4 stacks where your application is running and impacting. You want to have that visibility across them so that you can make the right decisions.
Okay,
So-
taking
so-
a step beyond how a specific tool works, especially we're going to talk containers with Langdon and Arun later. So I want to know what is the difference between monitoring virtual machines and monitoring containers? Monitoring containers is much more difficult. So how do you see the market evolving to meet the needs of monitoring containers? At the infrastructure level, monitoring containers, then at the higher order level, monitoring the microservices.
Or I was going to say monitoring services, right? It's like, do we not actually care to some extent about monitoring containers or VMs, right? And actually care about monitoring services and understanding what services are interacting.
Yeah.
Exactly, and because the tool was built for cloud-based applications initially in 2007.
No, let's
I think-
focus on what I'm saying. What I want to know is, where is the market evolving from here? We have the tool for the cloud-based distributed application. From here to the container world and to the microservices world, where is the market evolving? Where do you expect the market to go?
Well, as everybody is expecting, the market is going towards DevOps and microservices, and there's no doubt about that. And from my point of view, I am providing the solution for monitoring the microservices, so you get a holistic picture as Arun was mentioning earlier, we provide a service map that allows you to detect every single microservice and look at it in a topology form of view.
So if I can accentuate that a little bit, do I really care about monitoring my containers?
exactly.
The container, I can box it, don't go beyond this CPU, don't go beyond this memory. I don't really care how the container is behaving. I mean, I call containers as a diaper. If you shit in it, just dump it, bring a new diaper on. It's a disposable technology. What I care about is my microservices. I want to get a holistic picture of my application, whether I'm using containers or immutable VMs or something else.
I think just to add one thing to this, right? So the problem that happens is, like today, for you to be absolutely confident that I will do continuous delivery, that is, I'm going to try to push as fast as possible to production so that I can get this to my customer's hand, right? You got to have utmost confidence that I can detect whether something wrong has been deployed or not. So what we do at Shippable is that we watch this entire heat map of all our microservices running, and then we are looking and we are basically putting a timestamp on every time a deployment occurred. So then what you will see is you're counting the number of exceptions that you're getting out after that deployment. So you know that at this timeline, at this point, this deployment occurred, and my exceptions just went up by 10x. So the moment I see that, what I do is I roll back that one deployment immediately.
But that's that visibility that we're talking about. Each one of those services is something that you're tracking and monitoring.
Well, I was
You just
gonna-
have that
And
ability.
then the point I'm trying to
sorry.
make is, today monitoring is all about machines, right? People talk about memory, how many page outs I'm getting, and all of that stuff. So what I'm talking about is application monitoring is taking a completely different way
Based
of
on
Actually,
the deployment
from
event.
my
Yeah,
view,
highlight,
the monitoring the machines is the old thing. Monitoring the application at the level of the line of the code is what you want to do, because if there's an exception thrown, you want to know where it came from.
Langdon, do you agree with that?
So I was actually going to add to is like I actually think an even wider problem, right, is that the signal to noise ratio is getting way worse, right? Is that just the bare threshold of how much volume of data you have coming in, like how many of these exceptions are okay? What is okay about this kind of running service? I think what gets really interesting about kind of using the service model, right, is you start to understand the objective is to deliver the service. You don't really care what else is going on around it, as far as failure rates or whatever. And I think it actually is really dangerous sometimes to kind of over monitor an environment because you start to think that a 10x increase in exceptions is a bad thing, when it might be totally fine as long as you're still delivering the service. So I think it's not only do you have much better tools for collecting this data, but then now we're also starting to need big data technologies, right, to start to understand that data. And then on top of that, we're starting to need, do we need things, that are really an AI kind of model to actually make sense of all this inbound streaming data.
Exactly.
So you move from a more individualistic monitoring approach to a systems kind of a systems design.
Systems, and actually we have gotten into software analytics in the past year and a half, 2 years, and one of the components that I was talking about called Insights basically collects data from all of these sources that we talked about, and you get to go and make a decision about your business, not only about the technical side of your business, but about marketing, about revenue, about everything, because it's up to you what you want to collect.
This requires a meta shift. How many of you are from more from the operations side here, and how many of you are from developers? So probably
Ops first.
Few ops.
Yeah.
So, okay.
Notice they're sitting in the back.
So this sort of
They're
requires
keeping
a
their
meta
servers
shift.
up back there while we're talking.
When you are taking a more analytics kind of approach to monitoring, it requires a complete mental shift. Do you think ops people are comfortable with that, or do you think there's no other goal? That's the only way they could get around doing something.
Well, not to sidebar, right? So it's like, speaking as an old school developer, I don't know why I'd want to get woken up at 2 a.m. It's like there's a reason I like throwing this stuff over the wall to ops. I think what's interesting about the DevOps kind of model is more about actually giving the ability to solve the problem to the people who are on call, right? If you think about it, 20 years ago, we actually did it already. It's just that it was always the same guy or gal, right? That did all of these things. I had to be able to replace a hard drive when I worked at a startup, as well as be able to, write code. So we decided to striate out everybody into these specialties, and forgot about the fact that there was now no collective mind, right? And so we then had Agile, and now we have DevOps, right? Where we're trying to say, hey, maybe if we actually work together, we could actually deliver things well instead of, just everybody doing their own little piece.
Yeah, but I do disagree though. I think the super specialization is the reason why all of this is mess, right?
Yeah.
I think what we are moving towards is go back to conglomerating all these roles back into one single thing.
Yeah.
So this whole in my
But do you lose something there, right? I mean,
I think
With the right set of tools,
Yeah.
probably you can avoid that.
well, like set programming, right? For being SQL developer, right? Set programming is quite different than working in kind of more traditional.
But I mean, if you look
languages
at
like Python.
modern apps, they are moving away from set-based concept. I mean, it's all NoSQL, and I'm trying to object-based stuff. So you're kind of going into more of like saying, hey, the whole reason why, kind of JavaScript even took off to that great extent was the fact that I can use the guy to do Angular, I can use the guy to do Node, then I can use the guy to also write my Mongo queries.
To some extent.
just that.
So greenfield applications. In some ways that's very true. But it's also some of it also has to do with the vertical industries that it's actually made it into, right? So when I was working in pharmaceutical industry, dropping customer complaints on the floor is not okay. Dropping a Facebook status update, not that big a deal, right? But if you drop a customer complaint on the floor from Pfizer, that's $1 million fine, right? Just for one transaction. So I think it's also a little bit stylistic, and I'm not. While I don't actually disagree with you, I don't think that as programmers or as people in the industry, we're actually sophisticated enough yet to deliver on the goal that you're describing.
And a lot of
the question directly to Arun Gupta, who's the developer and the advocate. Well, you talk with so many developers. Do you think developers are sophisticated enough to understand this, or do you agree with Langdon? Because as I see it, if you use a tool like PASS, you could still keep the delineation between developers and ops and let them focus on what they are good at. But what are you seeing in the market? You talk with so many developers.
Right. I think we're talking about microservices. That's nothing new, first of all. There are lots of people who are still going the traditional monolithic route. And that's going to be the wave. Microservices is not a free lunch. It comes with a big cost, which people tend to forget. You do need a crack DevOps team in place. And then DevOps requires a huge cultural change. So most of the customers that I'm talking about, they're saying, not broken, don't fix it. Microservices solve a problem, but I don't really need it. I need that scalability, but I'm able to do that very well within my monolithic application itself. So one thing I want to clearly outline is don't look at microservices as a silver bullet that's going to solve your application problem. My key point over there is if your monolithic application itself is a distributed ball of mud, when you refactor that to a microservice, it's going to be a bag of dirt.
Okay.
You can't expect to not follow the basic design principles and have the DevOps philosophy. You don't need to have really Dev and Ops working hand in hand. That I'm I'm the conception stage, I'm going to start from there. But make sure there is a constant communication. You adopt the basic principles of DevOps, then your monolithic application will work very well. To talk about the monitoring aspect of it, I think there are two aspects. First is you need a dashboard, whether it's monolithic or microservices. That's what people are building. They're building dashboards where they have constant visibility. The other equally important aspect of it is automated alerts or take automated remedial actions. That if things, if shit falls apart, what do? All right, I'm a Netflix customer. I'm happy if they're giving me a high definition movie, but if one of their servers in Amazon somewhere breaks down, I'm okay if they fall back to a lower quality movie as opposed to say, I can't serve you anymore. So I think those remedial actions, that fallback, that resiliency, all those are very important aspects, whether you're doing microservices or monolithic applications.
But are developers ready to handle operations? In West Coast, especially in Silicon Valley where you live, you can find so many developers being able to programmatically handle the infrastructure. If you go to some other places, you're not going to get that talent. even if you get the talent, it's going to be pretty expensive.
Well, I think the other thing too, it's not about talent. The other thing that I think is critical is you have organizations that want to implement DevOps best practice. They want to implement Agile, but it's not because they don't have talented people. It's because they have organizational structure that forces them into that more monolithic structure. So I think one of the things you have to recognize is, and that's a really good point, by the way, if you're an organization, you say, I have this monolithic app, we want to rewrite it, we want to break it down into services, you're exactly right. The first thing you have to do is look at what's the development pattern and how is that going to change? So how do I take the team that I have of really smart people, they're not necessarily Silicon Valley people, but these are smart guys, how do we retrain them? You know, companies aren't going to fire a development team because they want to do DevOps. That's where I think a myth is happening in the overall concept of DevOps is dealing with organizations that are trying to transition through it. If you're a brand new organization built with 5 guys in a garage, you can do DevOps all day long.
So are you arguing that to do DevOps right, you need to break down your monolith into microservices? Are you putting it as a necessary condition? Or
So I think
I-
one thing we need
no.
to understand is, if you are doing microservices, then DevOps is a very clear requirement.
Exactly.
That's a good way to
Because
put
it's
it.
distributed, polyglot, database, all that stuff. If you're doing monolith, DevOps is a good thing. And then other thing to realize is, if you're doing DevOps, it's a good thing in general.
I think
The other part I want to make, as you were asking earlier, is are developers ready to handle that PaaS and infrastructure requirement? Now, what is very critical for that is, I'm going to go back to Netflix example or Amazon example. In Netflix, a developer can release any feature, any point of the time, any point of the day. And the reason they're able to do that is because there is a self-service infrastructure. So as a developer, if I built a feature, I know the ability, you know what, let me release this feature. 35% of traffic any given day on the evening is on internet is Netflix. And that's the statistics that Netflix guys quoted. So if I'm releasing a feature, I better release that feature at a non-peak time with that self-service infrastructure. Let me spin up like 3,000 Amazon machines, and I go to a dashboard or maybe using an API or a script, but not everybody is Netflix. So you really need those sophisticated engineers, at least for now, until that no-ops team comes along, helps you into the transition phase.
But my question is,
So I think
why do you need to really bring in a team that could programmatically manage the infrastructure when you can put PaaS as an abstraction?
Well,
And
they are.
let
I
them-
mean, but you like when you set up PaaS that way, that is what you're doing, right? But so especially if you're running that PaaS internally, now you do have an operational environment that might deliver on that model, but you still have to support it, right? You still have to have the people who understand that infrastructure and that self-service model who are going to continue to deliver that product to the developers, right? So I'm not sure.
Yeah.
I
From
agree.
an
PaaS is
operational point of view, operations point of view, I agree. From a developer point of view, which should I care? All I care is I write my code and push it to a Git or one of the CI tools. So why should I care about that?
I think
managing the
culture-
underlying complexity.
I think that's one thing I would agree, right? The way I think of the future is that developers should not care where my application is running, and operations of the machine layer should not care what application is running on that particular server.
But I don't
if
think
you
that's
need-
necessary. I don't think DevOps is necessary for that. Even in a monolithic app,
You can
right,
do that.
you should be trying to go down those models.
To add to Arun's point is that saying, I think you're talking about, hey, do I want this automation and all of that stuff is based on not whether it's monolithic or microservices. What it's actually based on is one thing, which is, do you want your application to evolve fast enough? Because you are going to get displaced otherwise. That's the driving force. So whether it's a 3-tier application with just database, API, and web front end, simple 3-tier application, if you kind of say that, hey, this application probably will never change for the next 5 years, or maybe I'll change once a year, do some patching and stuff like that, you don't need any automation. Because the cost of automation and all of that stuff is going to be higher in terms of ROI if you want to do it manually.
Well,
but on the other hand, if you want to change that 10 times a day, because
The problem is you don't know a lot of the
That's
time when you
One
launch
thing-
the app, right?
One thing is
And all of a sudden you can't fire this guy because
the chances of what are the chances that a business will not want to change an application?
Because you will actually
For
run out
5
of
years.
business if you're
The
evolving your application
business
once a
landscape
year.
has changed.
these
So-
changes are cultural changes. They have to be changed all across the board. And one thing is that, if your ops would like to go into a DevOps environment and your developers do not, that's not going to work, obviously. So it has to come from from the top.
I mean, but
so
I think
everybody.
But I think it's not culture at
And-
all, is what I would say. I think the reason I say that is because if you go on back into the 1980s, late 80s, this is the whole complete re-engineering of business process, whatever they were trying to do, right? It was not a cultural thing. It's basically the CEO or CIO decided, hey, you know what? We got to automate this entire thing. I'm going to get rid of all these memos that I'm handing around across the board. I'm going to get rid of it. Yes, maybe some people will not have a job after this. Maybe they do. We don't know. We'll all retool them. We'll re-engineer into something else. But it was not like, let's all of you guys agree on how to actually make this work. It was more of like saying, we need to evolve. Our business operating cost is way higher than our competitors. So we have to basically make this automation work. And that meant maybe 30-40% of the people who just did paper pushing, like office space kind of thing, is gone. So I can't.
But that is a cultural
Maybe-
change, right? I mean,
That is
depending
a
on,
Maybe today
Cultural change.
it's not.
right. It's the idea of fixing the
not
recipe,
a
not the cake,
requirement.
right? I mean,
It may not be a requirement today because one organization might think that I could just do without any change for next 5 years. But there are a lot of external services that are being used, and you might be an external service to another organization. So if they are moving towards microservices and DevOps, then you will be forced. Today you may not be forced. 2 years, 3 years, 5 years from now, you have to.
Well, the other thing too, those
But I mean,
microservices confront
let's-
applications that aren't changing, right? That's another concept to certain microservices. You could say, well, I can't upgrade my COBOL application, but I can front it with a service. So that guy doesn't live in the cloud, he lives inside your data center, but now there's a new service out there that's providing customer value. So that's that kind of thinking we were talking about monitoring and orchestrating. That's where it gets hard, right? If you got 5 services.
Well, I think the other aspect of that, right, is that the other huge thing that you want to be thinking about in this kind of space, right, is the ability to consume, and you were getting at this a little bit, but consume other people's services, right? Increasingly, you can buy so much kind of service, right, off the shelf from other organizations that are not things that you install in your data center, right? So, and being able to take advantage of those is also kind of like hugely beneficial to your application in the ability to kind of say, oh, you know what, we want to do much better monitoring, we want to do much better logging, we want to do much better, you know, kind of automation of our delivery systems. But if you don't have at least some kind of infrastructure or internal knowledge or culture or whatever you want to call that of kind of service models, right, and thinking about microservices, even in your monolithic application, you're not going to have good ways to consume all this stuff that's out there that's, you know, probably a lot cheaper than you running it yourself.
So I want to ask a question to the audience, actually. How many of you are building microservices-based applications today?
The same question.
Today. See, that's my point. Now, in terms of adoption, if we take 4 terms, which we have been talking about, PaaS, DevOps, microservices, containers. PaaS is sort of, you know, getting good. A lot of people are doing PaaS kind of stuff. DevOps is required no matter what you do, whether you're doing monolithic or microservices. That's, again, fundamentally very useful to help you evolve rapidly. Now come to containers and microservices. A lot of people have been saying, hey, we've been doing containers for 20 years. Immutable VM images, sort of containers, much heavyweight, but there are a lot more lighter weight formats like Docker, Rocket, AppC, name it, you know. Everybody has their own flavor. Microservices, again, you know, is sort of what people call as SOA for hipsters, or SOA 2, or SOA done right. A lot of terminologies for that. But it's not easy, you know. Nobody here in this room is doing microservices today. So I think the important aspect to me is in terms of, if you want to do one, to me, if you want to take one thing back from here, make sure you look at DevOps as the practices, how you can simplify to help your app evolve rapidly and meet your business demand. Because that is something that is fundamentally required. Whether you do containers, whether you do microservices, that gets into the nasty details.
DevOps is definitely a starting point, and microservices is the next stage of evolution to maximize your ROI. So I think we sort of set the stage for DevOps and microservices. So now I want to tie it back to containers and see whether it really helps. So my first question, I want to open it up to audience. So let's just do a quick take on containers. Do we need containers to do DevOps and microservices? If yes, give a strong reason for that. If no, so how beneficial containers are compared to VM? Definitely there is some benefit.
So just kind of like, so I would definitely say the answer like immediately is no, you don't need them. However, I think kind of the second part of your question really kind of shows some stuff, right? Which is that what is really interesting about using containers is that if you kind of follow the basic best practices guides of, kind of single service per container and stuff like that, you kind of accidentally fall into kind of a service, the service model, right? Microservice model, cloudy development where, you actually have resilient services and that kind of stuff.
And another thing, total cost of operation with containers, I think.
Density is just
Well,
so
yeah,
much higher.
I agree. So because we don't need containers, but let's say I have a microservice. All it's doing is monitoring something once a day.
Okay.
Do I want to spin up a immutable VM for that, which is going to take 6 gig and like 3 gig memory? Or I would rather spin up a container for that, which is much higher density.
Exactly.
Right.
That's the point I'm going to make. It's not just the much higher density in terms of how much you can put it in a VM or a bare metal thing. It's also about if you are building a microservices architecture, you want your service to come up fast. Like if you are using the immutable infrastructure approach to development and operations, you want your service to come up fast. You don't want 2 or 3 minutes for the entire VM to load. So I think you have a pretty.
Let me give you an example. So Amazon does 11.6 deployments per minute. They can do that on an immutable VM infrastructure. It has to be something fast. If you're doing that many deployments.
Just in the defense, though, of the VM guys, right, a little bit, they are way faster and way less heavyweight than I think we give them credit for. I definitely wouldn't say it's kind of containers are the only answer, but they're definitely.
I agree with you completely. The problem is not about how fast you can spin up a VM. The problem is if I want to patch it. So we did this at Kinect, right? We did VMs which were all images, and we needed to deploy this for 20,000 VMs across the world. So it was it was Windows, for heaven's sake. But again, but that was like a 4 gig image. Maybe on the Linux world it's not that big, but it was 4 gigs. So and then I had to change one DLL, which was 100 kilobytes, and I have to spin that whole VM back up. I have to patch that one DLL, and then I have to go and redeploy this 4 gig image to like 8 data centers across the world, moving 4 gig images and trying to bring all of this back up. If I had containers, I could have done that in 25 seconds. And I would have been done.
But you still have the same problem. I would agree with you absolutely in the speed concept. But containers still introduce the same problems as VMs. VM sprawl, making sure you got the right versions, making sure developers are only choosing specific versions, security flaws. So containers are not the magic bullet of saying, well, those go.
It's definitely not the magic bullet, but it's the next.
It's an evolution.
It's an evolution. It's a great, and it's a phenomenal solution.
But
your problems don't go away.
That's where things like PaaS come in and sort of.
Well, what I'm wondering is, today we're talking about containers. In 2 years we'll be talking about something else.
Exactly. Maybe unikernels or whatever it is.
We could talk about jails again. Huh? We could just talk about jails or mainframes.
Yeah, exactly. We'll go back.
It all goes to the mainframe.
So sort of set a stage for DevOps and microservices using containers as the underlying component. So before we take this discussion any further, I want to see if there is any question in the audience. There is one.
So it's really obvious. Sorry. So it's really obvious that all of us are working for technology companies because we've been having a discussion around DevOps, but having a discussion around tooling, actually. My question is to the panel, in this new DevOps world, how do we involve business and how do we segregate and reorganize business to take ownership of these microservices in virtual teams or the like?
Can I answer the question before I give it to you?
So what?
Okay. This may be a little controversial for some of the DevOps guys, but in my definition, DevOps should also include. It also includes aligning the business stakeholders into the equation. Otherwise, it's not DevOps.
So I was just going to say the biggest thing that I find, the 2 success criteria for any organization who wants to implement this is 1, pick 1 or 2 applications to start with. And those applications, meaning automate as much as possible from development to prod. And you will find out more things about your organization, all the rules, all the processes, everything. But that's really painful, and that's going to take you like 6 months to do. But once you do those 2 or 3 applications, and I'm speaking holistically here, quote, application. Once you do that for 2 or 3 cycles, I guarantee it'll be amazing how fast the other application stacks, whether they're rewrites, one more thing, and then all that, whether they're rewrites, whether they're cloud-based. The other piece to that is when you're talking about DevOps, it has to include all teams in the delivery train. So for example, I tell DevOps teams, do you bring finance people in? Your projects are being paid for by your organization in a certain manner. if you're going to start to say, hey, we can deliver 19 times a day to prod, your finance people probably want to understand how you're going to bill back those changes. Maybe they do, maybe they don't. But introducing every kind of character in the play is what's going to help make you successful.
I think to answer your question, it's very simple, right? Does your company do shadow IT? They're already doing DevOps. Because the reason why shadow IT exists is because the regular channel is too slow and business wants more faster output.
What I particularly like is when you have actually multiple shadow IT.
There are multiple. I
IT,
think
you have shadow IT and a shadow of them.
So companies want to get rid of shadow IT, though.
No,
So
they
what is
can't.
yours?
They cannot because that's basic. The cloud is going to actually accelerate that because now what's happening is a simple finance or an HR team can just say, you know what, I'm going to go get my CRM on Salesforce and I'm going to run everything there.
It's not, personally, I don't think of it as actually, it's not keeping shadow IT. What's actually starting to happen, right, is that you're starting to embed IT in the business.
Precisely.
Which
That's
is
what
better.
we want.
Like,
It is better.
I think that's a better way to look at it. Yeah,
And
I
that's
think
the
I
answer
have
to
time
your
for one more question. So
Yeah, so it actually ties in a bit into what you just say. Where is the business in the DevOps? Where do you put them?
We have to talk to them? Oh, the business. Well, yeah. Well, the business is hammering. I mean, we can all speak to it, whether you're on one side or the other. The business is hammering for those changes. And unfortunately, they really are the forgotten person of this. You know, developers just say, yeah, we can develop faster. You're like, well, anybody can deliver crappy code faster. So, like, for example, where's QA? Why isn't the database team included in your automated deployments? All of those teams, that's where I go back to. You have to include all those teams when you say an application.
So I think it's a fundamental shift. Literally, when we talk about dev and ops, dev actually includes not just the people who are developing the application. It includes the business people who are the stakeholders. End of the day, dev's job, dev always wants, like, I've got this cool feature, I want to push it out. Ops says, no, site is stable. So the goal is not to push out the feature fast or to keep the site stable. The goal is to enable business. Both of those guys need to work together. So it's basically talking, simple communication skills.
Another way of saying it, right, is like, personally, right, it's remove the word dev from DevOps and actually say agile teams, right? So it's really taking the agile teams concept, right, which already has business embedded in it, and adding ops to that organization. Personally, really what we want to be talking about here is that, and this is the kind of way I put it when I was doing more consulting, is, the CIO needs to become part of the business rather than a cost center. Right? Is that the goal here is that we as an organization are delivering software because that's part of our product, whatever that means, right? And so if you've got to be thinking the whole team's got to be working together. It's got to be QE, right, who doesn't get mentioned in DevOps a lot, right? It's got to be database people. It's got to be ops. It's got to be the business people. It's got to be finance, everything.
it got to be security too. So in other words, DevOps is about bringing IT to be part of the core innovation team. I was told that since you guys are not looking at your laptop and listening to us, we have 8 more minutes. So if you have any other questions, we can do that.
He moves quick.
I just would be interested in the panel making some comments about, with this new world order of microservices, potentially the cynic in me says that that's just APIs gone crazy. So, there's various vendors out there and solutions around the API economy and growing sets of APIs. But, with this microservices architecture, it seems that there's going to be a plethora of potential APIs that need to be monitored, have SLAs, security, service levels, finding them, versioning, on and on it goes. So I just haven't heard much discussion about, how the day 2 issues of having a microservices architecture, would run. Okay. The second thing, it's not so much a question, I guess it's more an adjunct around the DevOps thing. I think possibly what's quite interesting potentially for the audience here is, and I put my hand up, I'm a Red Hat employee, but I think one of the things that Red Hat's gone through with its own DevOps strategy around team inception, and I'd be interested in the panel around having a discussion or comment about the fact that there is a DevOps team within Red Hat Enterprise IT, but its charter is to support both InfoSec, app, dev, and infrastructure, but it's there to run only for a couple of years and then disband because it's set up a DevOps culture and change and practice within Red Hat Enterprise IT as opposed to having a DevOps group that runs into perpetuity. And I'd just be interested if the panel has, a view about that as well.
So I think I'll answer the first one. I'll try to at least. API management is a very, very critical aspect of it. One of the key aspects of microservices is you're not tied to a language stack. Today you might be using Java EE for this. You might be using Node.js for another one. Might be using Grails, Scala, Akka, name it. You're completely independent. End of the day, you have a bounded context. You have a REST endpoint that can be invoked by different services. So you really can't rely upon, I have a REST endpoint, I have a get, put, post, delete. I want them to be invoked by a particular user, which is possibly tied to a LDAP realm somewhere or a JDBC realm. And that's how the user needs to be authenticated, authorized. The service needs to evolve. Version 1, version 2, all those concepts, very, very valid in a microservice land. So for example, product pitch. In Red Hat, we have this product called as API management. That really allows you to put an API gateway in front of your microservice. And then you can say all the calls are made through that. And then you have a central gateway by which you ensure the policies, the requirements, et cetera, are met. So that's a very important aspect, specifically in a polyglot world.
One of the things you also might want to look for in a tool, if you're looking at a tool, is the visualization of your application interdependencies between those services and those API calls. So just a precursor to something you might see coming from XebiaLabs. Just saying.
So, I think...
So do you have any comment on the second part of his question, which I think is interesting?
I was actually going to ask, how long, you said the team, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
I was just going to ask, is there, for Red Hat, if you've already put the stake in the ground to say this team is going away, what is the timeline for that? How long do you think that'll take to transform the entire organization? I mean, maybe you guys can speak to it too.
Ben, do you have any idea on that?
My understanding from the guys running it, Phil, who's got sponsorship from the CIO, so to the point about getting business involvement, it's absolutely critical.
That's all part of it.
But my understanding is it's around about 2 years that their idea is that they disband. But I think more the question is that that's Red Hat's approach, that they've got a team set up for DevOps, but their idea is that they're not going to stay there into perpetuity because it is about as much about cultural change as it is about changing people and process.
Well, and one thing I think is really important about that team and the way it was set up inside Red Hat IT is that it's not what I've seen a number of organizations do, which has what they call the DevOps team, which kind of goes off and like maybe supports other teams or something. They had a product, right, that they were responsible for, that they delivered, and they tried a new model of how they went about delivering it to try to be an exemplar for how to deliver products, right? So it's not quite the same as when, like I said, I've definitely seen organizations that are kind of naming some people who are specialer than all the rest, right? This isn't that. This was, let's just try to do an exemplar, let's see if it actually works, run it as a test. Hopefully the people we put on that team are also really good at documenting things, and so they can kind of pervade culturally into the rest of the teams, which I think it's an interesting approach. Obviously we'll see how well it works, but rather than, like I said, some of the other models that I've seen try to do it.
You have something to say?
Yeah, I think I completely agree with having a product along with it. Just creating a team with no real product that they're going to actually deliver, which is not a product of DevOps. I'm talking about real product that goes to customers, right? If you can't have that, then there's always ifs and buts that people can always put to their product to say it doesn't apply to them. Mm-hmm. So one of the things that we did internally at Shippable was that you had to basically a developer supports this end to end, and there were tons of developers. A lot of folks came from Microsoft, and they said, "Oh, we'll never do this." But the fact that it could be done, and there was an example of how to actually do it, and said if it works in this way, it has to work in this way also. So that's a good way of actually implementing it, because you need reference architecture, you need reference stuff that people can say it has been done before, so we can actually do it again.
Another thing organizations will struggle with is the fact that if they say we have this kind of DevOps organization, this new delivery pattern, but they still have a lot of legacy applications which are in the old model. Can you imagine working in an operations, like a data center? So all of a sudden you have these new applications that are new and shiny, and they're getting delivered in this brand new automated pattern, and then you still have a 17-page spreadsheet to do the .NET application. So operations gets more and more antsy. I say operations as a group because all of a sudden they're like, this is really good. How come everyone's not doing this? So that's why it's so important to have everyone at the table for these conversations. How do we get the next set of applications over so that we can stop doing spreadsheets, for
Well,
example?
and personally, if you can make that product that they're working on not be greenfield,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
It also helps, right? So something that exists already that they're now going to kind of switch there, because really we're just talking about a new development model, right? We're not really necessarily saying it needs to use, kind of microservices models or containers or any of that stuff. Sure, it can, and that'd be great, but just be a flat-out monolithic application. I mean, it could be in COBOL. Who knows? It doesn't matter, right? The point is that you're switching your development model around a product that already exists, so that you can then, kind of kill off some of those naysayers, right? That say, oh no, we can't do that one.
Yeah. But operations, and I use them for example. They have to learn how to monitor this new application. So they have to culturally shift as well to say, okay, I have to use new tooling or anything. So
any other question?
Yeah, just one last question. You talked about earlier today that containers, when they breaks, you don't care about it. So why is that? Why is it not interesting in looking at why it failed in the first place, since it can basically hit your all production servers? So, yeah.
Two different statements. One, root cause analysis is not a bad thing, right? Keeping the service upright is a separate thing, right? So basically, I think, right, and correct me certainly if I'm wrong, but I mean, when we're saying that we don't care about the container's uptime, that's because what we care about is the service uptime. That doesn't mean that you don't want to do root cause analysis on why some individual aspect went down and try to figure out how you're going to keep that from happening again, so that you have that much more, that much less expense essentially in your operation. Your kind of uptime and resiliency should actually not be affected just because you're, even if you're losing a container a second, right?
Right.
So it goes back to the fact that monitoring is at the core of.
Right. When the container breaks, so I don't really care in the sense that I can quickly churn up a new container as opposed to firing up a brand new VM. So I quickly churn it up, but the root cause analysis is absolutely important. That's nothing to do with the container by itself. That's most likely your application which breaks down.
And the other thing about, sorry.
You take a flamethrower in your data centers where people started with that, right? And if you could go through and knock over every rack and punch things out and pull cables and everything still worked, then it showed you had resilient infrastructure. But in that case, you exactly know why things are failing, right? It's the idea that's already.
So the other thing also about is it's like when you say replace it with another container, you can actually take that existing container out into your machine and look at it yourself, right? I mean, that's a huge deal. I mean, getting a VM out from a data center is pretty much impossible, right? So getting a container out of a data center is pretty much.
But it's also a mindset too, which it's a great mindset to implement for your team. That says, hey, when we hit a failure, we're going to get the service back up and running automatically, or But we also have a process. I hate to use that word, but a way to grab that container and then take a look at it and have a team analyze it to be like, what the heck happened here? So then that's DevOps. You're learning. You're iterating.
I have a question, another for the audience. How many are using Docker in production today?
I'll just say yes.
In production.
Yes.
Okay, 4 hands. All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
How many of you have been asked by ops to write remediation for your apps as you DevOps?
Okay, so I think we have come to the. You have a question? Okay, we have come to the end of the panel. Do you think we really made a case for DevOps, containers, and microservices? How many of you think we made a case? Okay,
Tough
so
crowd.
that's good.
Tough crowd.
Not bad, tough crowd. Thank you very much, guys. It was
Thank
a fun
you.
panel. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Good job. It was fun.
Oh, nice.
That was really fun.
That's good, man.
That was awesome.